وينشر الهدي إيمانا وموعظة فبالجهالة قد خابت مساعينا غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا وأوشك اليأس أن يغشى.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon you. Good evening and welcome to the Sulaimaan Ravat show on ITV. We are coming to you live this beautiful Friday evening, hot Friday evening from our studios here in Sunning Hill, Johannesburg. And a warm welcome to all our viewers on channel 347 on the DSTV platform. Now, the weather is always a topic of discussion, but more so when there has been flash floods, as we saw last week, and then all the speculation as to how beneficial that rain was in terms of the drought, in terms of assisting with water restrictions and the low levels at dams across the country. Also, a lot of concern going forward in terms of the water situation in the country and you know, what kind of short-term and long-term prospects we are looking at. So, we are talking water this evening, the source of life. Even the Quran talks about it. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. That every living thing originates from water and it's dependent on water. And water is a very valuable commodity and one that we need to use responsibly. Not only do we have a patriotic duty in that regard, we also have a religious duty in that regard. And in the second half of the program, we will be joined by a scholar, and that is Moulana Dr. Ashraf Dokrat, who will be giving us the Islamic perspective on the importance of water and the proper and correct and responsible usage of water. But for the first half of the program, we have in studio with us a representative of the Department of Water and Sanitation, and that is Sputnik Ratau. Mr. Ratau, thank you so much for your time. Good evening and welcome to ITV.
Good evening, Moulana, and thank you so much for the time that you've given us on ITV.
No, it's always a pleasure. I can see you're a very busy man. This issue is keeping you quite occupied.
Very much on my toes, but it's something that needs to be done.
Indeed. Let's go back. Where did the drought start? Many people would be wondering. And where did the problem for us in South Africa start that has led to these restrictions and to these concerns about the low levels of water in dams, etc.?
Probably we should start with the fact that South Africa is basically a water scarce country because we receive less than world average rainfall on any good rain year. So therefore, beginning from that perspective, we need to understand that we do not actually have the luxury of the amount of water that we would want to believe that we do. But about 2 years to 2.5 years ago, we started realizing that we are receiving even less rainfall than what we normally receive. And then we started looking at the fact that we would probably run into some water shortages. Mm-hmm. The very first provinces that were affected were KZN, the Free State, Limpopo, Northwest, and the Northern Cape to a certain extent. But the first 4 were the ones that were really, really hard hit by the drought. And peculiar enough that KZN, even though it is next to the ocean and it normally receives a good amount of rain, was actually in that situation. And therefore, we started looking at the fact that the dams started going down, the rivers started drying up. A lot of people were being affected because water was not being received upstream and at the higher levels. But also we started seeing the effect on livestock, especially the farmers were being affected negatively. A lot of cattle were dying, sheep and so on. Mm-hmm. And therefore that is where the whole thing actually began about 2.5 years ago or so.
Now, many people don't have a full grasp of this. Are we currently in a drought? What kind of a drought? A hydraulic drought, I think is what they talk about, the agricultural drought. Are we in both? And where do we stand in terms of that?
We are actually in a hydrological drought where there is a direct lack of water, or rather an insufficient amount of rainfall has been had over the last 2 years to 2.5 years. that has affected everything else. And as you correctly put in your intro, that water is quite cross-cutting. It's about industry, it's about farming, it's about domestic, you name it, it's got to have water. And therefore, that is why the impact is much more devastating than if there was a lack of anything else, fuel or electricity. But this because it speaks to every human being, wherever you are working or wherever you are living, you will be affected by the lack of water.
Now, how have we been coping in the last 2 years?
It has been a very difficult 2 years. We have seen a lot of negatives happening, and that is why we even had to start having restrictions being imposed. And if you remember that the area of eThekwini in KZN, the area of Mangaung in the Free State were the first ones to actually impose restrictions, because the reality was that the river systems were not sufficiently being charged to be able to sustain the livelihoods and everything else that was happening there. And therefore, there was a need to start reducing the water demand, so that people can start understanding, not just understanding, but appreciating the fact that there is a need to actually begin the idea of saving water. Although the issue of water saving is one of our central messages, but I think now in this drought that we are seeing, it has become more apparent and much more increasingly important for people to understand.
Now, when we talk about water restrictions, what do we mean? I mean, there was that communication via the media, etc., in terms of when to water your gardens, when not to, using grey water for the cars, guidelines in terms of the pools. Is that what do we mean when we talk about water restrictions? Or is it a kind of water shedding, like we had load shedding with Eskom a few years ago, where there's a total stop in the supply for a period of time?
Water restrictions have got different levels, and basically for the best part of time we've been operating at what we call level 2 water restrictions, where it is about the reduction in the amount of water that is available in the system. And that is actually something that you can be able to manage from your water boards, from your municipalities. You can be able to reduce that. It implies that there will be a reduction in the pressure. There will be obviously an impact, particularly on people living in the higher areas. But it would not be what we would call water shedding, because at that level we haven't started stopping availability of water. Because one of the things that we try and do actually, or rather achieve through the water restrictions as well, is for us not to get to a situation where we need to actually stop having water in the system. Because unlike electricity, which you can switch on and off, and it comes on and it goes off immediately, with water, if you actually stop the water in the system, when you have to bring it back in, you have to do it progressively and very slowly so that it does not impact on the infrastructure. Because then there are possibilities of pipe bursts, there are possibilities of infrastructure failure of different kinds, and so on and so forth. So instead of getting to a point where we cut off water, which is something that you would find probably in your level 3 kind of restrictions, we'd rather reduce the amount that is available. Like if you to give you an example, what happened with Gauteng after the 12th of August when we gazetted for the water restrictions. But we realized that for a while there was no particular savings that we were realizing out of the request for people to reduce water by about 15%. Then the decision was made to say Rand Water reduce the amount available to municipalities directly by 15%, so that everybody then operates from less 15% of the amount of water they would have received. And that is why you started seeing areas like your particular Randburgs and so on and so North Cliffs and so on beginning to have a reduced amount of water available visibly. But yet we hadn't come to the point where we are cutting water yet.
One gets the impression sometimes that South Africans are not taking this water restriction call very seriously. If you look at the way people conduct themselves with regards to the pools and the gardening, with regards to the washing of the cars and that kind of thing, would you concur with that kind of sentiment that the call hasn't been heeded in a way that's proportionate to the seriousness of the issue?
I would agree with that, and particularly looking at the history of the country, where we have really taken the availability of water for granted. And whenever, even when we have campaigns about water saving and what have you, people do not take it very, very seriously because they always see water, even if they don't get it from their taps. Some of them see water in the rivers and they think that, there will always be water. But there are so many other things that are involved in accessing water that people have taken a lot of time to understand. But when we see what the outcomes are out of this experience of the drought, we realize, looking at the experience in KZN particularly, where because of the water restrictions, there has been a visible reduction in water demand. And we have seen a lot of savings around how much water is happening. In Gauteng, it took a bit of time to come in. And until we came to that decision to say Rand Water will reduce the amount of water available to municipalities by 15%, that hadn't quite sunk in. But over the last couple of weeks, we've realized that, for instance, in the city of Tshwane, like the mayor was announcing the other day, they've actually been able to go beyond the 15% that we had requested for them to reduce for domestic use. They were at about 20 point something. City of Joburg has done quite well as well. They've gone beyond 15%. We're still struggling with Ekurhuleni. We're still struggling with the West Rand, although the West Rand is doing quite well to come towards those limits, but they are not there yet. Mfuleni and the others are still lagging behind, and therefore that issue of water restrictions will still remain with us for a while.
Now, the flash floods that we had, sometimes people take a very simplistic approach to it. They drive on the highways and they see it's raining in abundance. Highways are flooded and cars are floating and shacks are being washed away. And they think, well, there's it now. That's quite a bit of water.
It is quite a bit of water, and it's a scary amount of water. But the issue is that, like we are saying, those are flash floods. They just happen like now, and then that water is gone. But what happened as well is that those flash floods fell over an area that does not feed into the Vaal River system. They fell in Joburg and in Pretoria and areas surrounding those. But that water then flowed into the Yuxkay, some of it flowed into the Henops and so on, that those rivers fed into the Crocodile, which took the water actually towards Hartbeespoort Dam. So it's a different system altogether that feeds, in fact, the northwest, not even Gauteng, instead of where we would have wanted the rain to fall. Be that as it may, we have had some rains in the Vaal River system. We know that the Vaal River system is actually fed by about 14 dams, and it is encompassing Mpumalanga, Free State, Gauteng, as well as some parts of Northwest. So there has been some rainfall over there. That is why we have seen an appreciation in the dam levels around the Vaal. But we should also remember that about a week ago on the 7th, we released water from the storage reservoir at Sterkfontein Dam in the Free State to feed the Vaal, so that the Vaal did not go below 25%, which is where we wanted to make sure that the Vaal does not go below 25%, simply because of the impact it would have had on the economic activities of Gauteng. So we are now, on Wednesday, the Vaal was at about 32.17, which was an appreciation from the 26.2 that it was a little earlier on last week.
What's the plan for Gauteng in particular? Because it's a smaller province, yes, but it's also the economic hub, and you've got all this migration, people from other provinces coming to settle in Gauteng. Maybe they feel there's still gold there from the old days in Gauteng. I heard one of the experts saying that it can take up to 5 years for dams to get to the levels that they need to be at. What's the plan for Gauteng?
It is true that for us as a country to get out of the drought that we are in now, it will take anything between 2 and 5 years for us to actually, of good rain, by the way, for us to be able to get back on track. The plan for Gauteng, which unfortunately, by the way, does not have its own independent rivers that feeds into it. We depend on rivers that come from other provinces. But one part of the plan is obviously to say, we have the Orasekom, which is the Orange River Sinku, that feeds from, that we share with Namibia. Therefore, it's a shared water course. We have also the water from the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, which has been performing very well, by the way, that even in this drought that we are experiencing, not just as South Africa, but as a region, we have continued to receive water as per the agreement between the two countries. So that operation still goes on. We are obviously in the process of setting up the second phase of Lesotho Highlands Water Project, which will come on stream, all things being equal, a bit later than what we had anticipated before, but we are expecting that by 2025 we will be commissioning the second phase, and therefore we will be able to get some more water from there. Obviously, we are looking at other things as well. Groundwater is something that we are looking at because according to the WRC, as a country, we haven't actually scratched the surface in terms of exploiting the groundwater that is available in the country. And therefore, those are some of the things that we are looking at. But we have to plan ahead as a country to say what are the possibilities. And therefore, those are some of just the little things that we have to do. The issue of water savings as a nation has got to be paramount. Because unless we actually do that as second nature to ourselves, we will continue to struggle. We need to also inculcate a sense in ourselves as a people to understand that pollution is something that actually does not help our water availability. One, in terms of water quality at source, because once we pollute our rivers, our wetlands, we're creating serious problems, because then we are actually making it even more expensive to actually clean that water. So it's something that we need to look at. The issue of vandalism and theft of infrastructure is something that we need to have to help the population to understand that infrastructure that is set up, it is set up for the benefit of the nation. And therefore, as an individual, as a member of a community, I need to take my place as a responsible citizen to protect that infrastructure.
Quick question before we go for a break, Sputnik. I heard someone say the other day, but Sterkfontein, which in Gauteng is a kind of reserve dam, it's above 90%, so we can't be too bad off, even if the Vaal is not at a very good level, we got enough in reserve.
Yes, we do have, but it is always best for us to keep Sterkfontein at above 90%. Even if it's above 100%, because as we correctly say, it is our reserve storage, it's our back pocket. Only when we desperately need it should we then go into it. It is not a dam that we should, whose resources we should necessarily use willy-nilly. And therefore, we can't go on in Gauteng and say, no, but we've got a reserve dam in Sterkfontein, so therefore let's just go on. Because by the way, that water still needs to be recharged, or rather the dam needs to be recharged in order for that storage to be at a level that will help us going into the future.
Okay. We're going to go for a break, but at the same time we're going to open the lines. We have a few more minutes with Sputnik Ratau from the Department of Water and Sanitation. We're talking about the water crisis, not only in Gauteng, but across the country. The number will appear on your screen. You can start calling whilst we go for the first commercial break.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته.
Welcome back. We're talking about the water crisis in South Africa. We had some very good perspective and insight from Sputnik Ratau from the Department of Water and Sanitation, who's in studio with us for a few more minutes. So I'll open the line, 011 086 7777. That's 011 086 7777. The number is on your screen. We'll take a few calls before we let Sputnik go. But whilst we wait for the calls, we spoke quite a bit about Gauteng, and you spoke earlier on about KZN and how the drought started. How are some of the other provinces, how's the Cape and the other provinces coping?
I think we are all in it together. The Western Cape, for instance, even though it's a winter rainfall province, it also did not receive as much rainfall as it normally would receive. And therefore, there was a need as well to implement water restrictions there, Cape Town, City of Cape Town, and a few other areas outside of the city. In fact, for them, it became even more critical because the City of Cape Town decided to actually up the water restrictions to level 3, which obviously implies inclusion of throttling. It implies the issue of closing of water from certain times to certain times. So that has not been easy. And if we remember a couple of months ago, Cabinet decided to say that, look, let us look at this and take it as seriously as it is. And therefore decided that all the other 8 provinces besides Gauteng would be drought disaster areas. That gave assistance by way of ensuring that we are able to bring in the National Disaster Management Center. We are able to then coordinate assistance from a central point, bring in the Department of Water and Sanitation, Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, Rural Development, Cooperative Governance, the Department of Finance, and SALGA, in order for us to be able to have shall I say, some kind of teamwork, because there was also the interministerial task team that was set up to overlook that process. And then we have the officials that then are meeting twice a week, every week, Wednesday and Friday, just to be able for us to see what are the impacts, where are the hotspots still, and so on and so forth, where is the most urgent need required. That has been able to bring together, government, because instead of working in silos, where agriculture would go and do its own thing and water and sanitation would be doing something else elsewhere, but we are able to all sit together and say, where is the most need and why? And therefore, based on that, we can be able to make sure that, the assistance that comes from government is then directed towards a particular cause.
The number to dial 011 086 7777 if you have any questions for Sputnik Rata. We have a few more minutes with him before we bring the first segment of the program to an end. What about the agricultural drought part of it? This year, the rainfall this year so far, normally I hear the experts say in terms of agriculture it's between September and December, how much of rain you receive in that period. Have we done a bit better this year as compared to last year? Are we facing a further prospect in the early new year of an increase in food prices as a result of the drought?
I think there's still some unease in terms of how much rain we have received yet, because I know that the last time I was in one of those meetings, it was quite clear that some of the farmers delayed the beginning of their tilling of the land because they were not too sure how much rain we will actually be able to find. Because the difficulty is that it is always better assured to get water from rain, as this country basically receives most of its water from rainfall. And therefore, that creates a kind of a better assurance than when we're thinking that, oh no, we'll get water through a tunnel from somewhere and be able to do that. That might take a bit more time, and in fact still have less water than what we would have received in a normal rainfall season. So some of the farmers have already started their work, but others have just delayed getting into it. So there is that prospect that for as long as the drought persists, the issue of higher food prices will always be, somewhere in the background.
What about the predictions going forward? What are the experts telling the Department of Water and Sanitation? You mentioned earlier on that it could take between 3 and 5 years of good rainfall for us to break out of the drought. Is better rainfall predicted for the next few years? I heard one expert say during the week that we are where we are globally because of El Nino, hotter weather. But some experts are saying we may move towards a La Nina, if I think that's the term, where there'll be rain, but in a more devastating form, not the kind of rain that we usually experience in South Africa. What's the prospects going forward, and what's the plan of action then from the side of the department?
Well, what the discussion has been...
okay, if you could just hold that, Sputnik. Let's just take the caller very quickly. Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Viewer, you live on air? I think making the mistake again.
Mine's not through.
Making the...
Hello?
Yes, good evening and you're welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, the problem is that, as we always say, keep the volume down on the TV, because then you end up listening to yourself in the background and you get confused. Yes, you can continue, Sputnik.
Yes, when we engage with the weather services, which is, by the way, they form part of that interdepartmental team, what they indicated was that there was an idea that the La Nina would be able to help us, because the El Nino had brought those high temperatures and all that. But what happened was that the La Nina moved off into the ocean. And then when it came back on land, it was no longer as strong as it was, such that the amount of rain that we thought it would be able to bring is therefore predicted to be less. Although we are still expecting above average rainfall, somewhere from between now and the end of the year, but more especially between January and April next year, which is the tail end of our rainy season, but also it is the time when we actually experience most of our rainfall. So for this period, we might be able to get out of it, but it's a question of also how long then the next dry period of our winter is, and how severe that winter is, for us to be able to make sure to rather be assured that the next summer season will start earlier. Because I think the main thing for us is that the summer rainfalls have got to start quite early. If they start somewhere in September or so, then we are in a bit of a good space. But right now they started quite a bit late, and therefore that is the reason. Such that for the next year or two, we'll still be in the situation that we are.
Final question, Sputnik. Are there any plans in the pipeline to increase the costs now as a result of the drought, the cost of water?
The idea is that, this drought is not man-made. So it would, at the moment, be unfair to actually pass on extra cost to the consumer. But the idea is that through the water restrictions, then we are able to actually implement a cost factor to anybody who transgresses those restrictions. And therefore, it is about that. It's some kind of a balancing act that those people that keep within their limits will still be able to benefit. But once you go up above and beyond, then obviously those kind of extra costs will come in.
Sputnik Rata, thank you so much for coming into studio this evening, for your time and for the perspective and explanation. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for ITV for having us.
Have a great evening and a great weekend.
Thank you.
We go for a break. When we come back, we are joined in studio by scholar Moulana Dr. Ashraf Dokrat, and we take a look at the Islamic perspective on the preservation and conservation of water.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته.
Welcome back. Now we're talking about the water crisis in South Africa this evening on the program. In the first half of the program, we had Sputnik Ratau from the Department of Water and Sanitation. Joining us in studio now, we have Moulana Dr. Ashraf Dokrat from Lodium. And we're going to be talking about the Islamic perspective when it comes to water conservation, when it comes to using water responsibly and constructively, the importance of water. I discussed the verse in the introduction of the program, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ, water being the source of life, and water being so pivotal and so vital to every aspect of our existence, from individual usage to agriculture to industry. How we see in history also how villages and how different communities they developed around water sources. Different verses in the Quran Kareem could give us different perspectives on water. So let's welcome Moulana to the program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah.
Moulana, the parameters, what kind of parameters has the Sharia put in place, has the Sharia set when it comes to water conservation?
Well, firstly, I think that we need to acknowledge that once again, the Sharia is not silent on matters such as conservation in general, and in particular, water conservation. If we think about the Sharia in the broadest terms, then Sharia aims to preserve certain ends. And there are certain purposes to which Sharia aims. And among these, the ulama list about 5, depending how you look at it. But among these are the preservation of one's deen, the other is the preservation of life, and the other is the preservation of honor. Now, if we consider any one of these in relation to water, then we would see that the preservation of life, water is pivotal to that end. And so, if this is a purpose of Sharia and the entire Sharia aims to preserve life, then we have to make sure that we have accessible water to preserve life. If we say that the Sharia aims to preserve a person's deen, then we know that Deen al-Islam, one of the important conditions of Deen al-Islam is the whole institution of Tahara. And so Tahara is to be preserved at all costs so that we can fulfill our responsibility of being an abd to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and perform our prayer as it should be done. So we see that the preservation of water is pivotal to that. When we look at honor, especially in our situation in South Africa, the honor of a human being and his dignity is often linked to the access to good running water that he can access for his own cleanliness, for his own personal needs. And we've seen this in the past where people were dehumanized almost, and I'm sure our guest spoke about it before us, when they don't have access to good water. So in terms of the Sharia and the purposes of the Sharia, the maqasid of the Sharia, these are linked very closely to the aspect of water and the provision of water. Now, the Sharia goes a step further, Moulana, and says that on one level you have these as hajat. They're absolutely necessary on some level. On some level, they become zarurat. In other words, they are supplementary and necessary needs. And at another level, then they are the tahsiniyat. In other words, they complete the entire requirement. So on all 3 levels, we can cite many examples of where water plays a role in our lives, whether it is on the level of the hajat or the zarurat or the tahsiniyat. So if we consider water in the framework of the Sharia itself, then certainly we can find sufficient legal basis and a Shari basis for the preservation of water and for making water accessible to everybody. In terms of looking at the provision of water, I think that the laws that we have in South Africa, certainly with regards to water rights, are very much in tune with what the Sharia says. For example, in South Africa, we know the water does not belong to anybody. It is the collective ownership of the entire citizenry in the country. And so what you have is access to that. You have usage of that. You have and in Sharia we can go with that idea very, very easily, in that it is a right that we have the ability to use that, and we can find lots of precedent for that in the Sharia, and we have then the responsibility to make sure that we use it in such a way that the future generation can also benefit from it. So these are some of the Shari considerations. There are also some fiqh considerations which we can talk about later.
Yeah, look, the fiqh is what in many ways regulates us on a day-to-day basis, our day-to-day activities. Now, one is obviously the importance of water, and I think you've elaborated on that very eloquently, and on how the Sharia looks at it from a very core perspective in terms of its conservation and preservation. But now, in a situation like this, where you have a water crisis, and even I suppose many times the ulama give us the examples of even using water responsibly when there's an abundance. How does the fiqh mechanism regulate it and give us guidelines in terms of day-to-day activities?
In terms of day-to-day activities, I think as a guiding principle and as a golden rule for us, as Muslims, we believe that the Sunnah is a solution to all our problems. Whether it is a problem or not, a Sunnah lifestyle means that we will be living a good lifestyle, a wholesome lifestyle. And in the absence of a sunnah, you either find a bid'ah or you find an abuse and an excess. So in our situation, we know that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, saw Sayyidina Sa'ad radiallahu anhu performing wudu at one occasion and said to Sa'ad, "Ma hadhi saraf?" What is this extravagance, O Sa'ad? And Sa'ad said, "Afil wudu israf?" Can there ever be extravagance in wudu? This is a means to an ibadah. How can there be an extravagance in this, Ya Rasulullah? And Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, "Na'am, wa in kunta ala nahrin jarin." Yes, even if you are on a flowing river and you're performing that wuzu, you have to do so within the limits that are set by the Sharia. And therefore, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have made wuzu with a mud. This is a mud, Moulana. This is a mud that comes with a sanad and comes with a chain of narrations right through from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this mud, which I got from Medina Sharif, is a mud in exactly the same dimensions and volumes as the mud that was used by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was able to perform a complete wuzu with this. So that sets the standard now for us. And the thing about wuzu is that we know to pray salah, and to pray salah there are certain requirements that are in place before the salah. For example, we have to cover our satar, and so everybody purchases whatever he needs to cover his satar out of his own money, out of his own pocket. When it comes to wuzu, unfortunately, I think our mindset is somewhat different.
Use the masjid water.
Exactly. we feel that somebody else has to pay because somebody is paying for it at the end of the day. Somebody else is responsible for our wuzu. And so we need to shift. We need a major shift. Now the question is, how do we achieve that shift? And the means to achieve that shift, I believe, is through the fiqh. The fiqh regulates 7 categories of actions. Either an action is farad, wajib, sunnah mu'akkada, etc., etc. And so at a point we have to say, as fuqaha, as scholars, that this action is haram. And vociferously we have to say that this action is haram, and just as another haram action comes under censure and has the potential to be a means of sin in the akhirah, a burden for a person in the akhirah. Similarly, any sort of extravagance as far as wudu and as far as wasting of water, not only for wudu but for any reason, is a means of sin. We know that in the Islamic legal system, the qadi has a right to implement a ta'zir, a discretionary punishment if he sees that things are going wayward in the community in any way. And so if we have the sanction of the fuqaha, the scholars, to say that this is a censured act, and had you been, although we are not in the Islamic State, had you been in the Islamic State, you would have become perhaps liable for some sort of punishment and some sort of sanction. Now, when a person considers his act, the gravity of it suddenly draws to his mind. At the moment, there's no... It is a good thing to do almost, Moulana, to save water.
It's nice.
It's nice. Yeah. It's a good thing to do. And if you're more green, so to say, you do more of it. But really, it hasn't...
Necessary.
It hasn't come to us that, look, this is such a dire thing that we need to really be considerate now about how we treat water.
I suppose the advancement of technology has allowed for a lot of bad habits to creep in. And I mean, you look at this mood, I think it's about 750 milliliters, yes, 3/4 of a liter. Somebody was saying that the ulama must say that stick only to the fara'id of wudu, and that's not necessary because you can make a full sunnah wudu with 750 milliliters. It'll take some practice.
Sure.
Previously, we used to shower with buckets, and a lot of water was saved. Now, because that water is flowing and the shower heads are getting bigger and the pressure is getting higher, these bad habits have crept in, but we have to understand that apart from a patriotic responsibility,
yes,
we have a religious responsibility, even in times of abundance, to do these things which are not good and not mustahab, which are compulsory and wajib.
Exactly. And Moulana, I think that if we say that we have a dynamic fiqh and a fiqh that can respond to this, then I think that it is a responsibility on the scholars on the one hand to show the seriousness of it through their fatwa, through their irshad, through their religious verdicts, etc. And then it is the responsibility of the community to respond to that, not only for their own need, but also I think, for the betterment of the future generations that are going to come. Because we've reached a stage now when we know that our actions don't only affect our own self, it will affect those who come after us as well. And so we need to be conscious about this, I think, and almost develop a fiqh around drought-stricken areas. I mean, we know South Africa and the region has suffered a drought not in the recent past, but for a prolonged period. And so our fiqh has to be such that it meets the challenge of the time. This is what we say.
Time to go for a break. We're talking about the water crisis in South Africa. We are speaking currently to Moulana Dokrat, and when we come back after the break, we continue.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته.
Welcome back. We are discussing the water crisis in South Africa. It's a live program coming to you this evening from our studios in Sunninghill, Johannesburg. In the first half of the program, we had Sputnik Ratav from the Department of Water and Sanitation. He gave us the perspective of the drought and how things are going and the different logistical arrangements. And the last few minutes, we've been talking to Moulana Dokrat, and we've been speaking about the Islamic perspective on preserving of water and using water responsibly, and how the fiqh needs to kick in here and make people realize that it's not a good thing to do, to use water sparingly and responsibly. It's a necessary thing to do. Now, we will open the line 011 086 7777 for your comments and questions. The number will continue to be on your screen as well. Remember, when you call in, please put down the volume of your TV set totally. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to hear me and you're going to get feedback, and we waste unnecessary time. We have about 8 minutes or so before the end of the program. Moulana, you know, the different Muslim bodies and ulama bodies and different leaders, I've given Jummah talks. I spoke about it this afternoon in my Jummah talk. Posters have come out, suggestions are there, what time to water the garden, how to use the water in the pool and grey water. We've seen the contraptions where the water from after you shower is taken and stored into a kind of drum, and you can use it for the gardening and you can use it for many other things. But for some reason, and I think Sputnik was talking about it in the first half of the program as well, it's just not sinking in. People are just not taking it seriously enough. I wonder why, and from a religious perspective, what can be done to give it some impetus?
I think, Moulana, you raise a very, very important point. And the interesting thing about this phenomena is that it is not a disease, so to say, of the rich. I spoke to a friend of mine recently. He lives in a squatter camp, and he was saying, you can't believe the type of water abuse and the type of wastage that happens even there. What we don't realize, Moulana, is that water abuse is not only the fact that we waste water per se. If we waste electricity, we are in fact wasting water, because there's water used in the production of electricity as well. So there are a number of related, even wasting a single item that comes out of a manufacturing process means that we are wasting water. I think what we need is education, like with all other things. And the ulama bodies have to be commended for the stance that they've taken as far as this is concerned. The passionate appeal that they've made to people, I think, is really to be taken seriously. And we can only do so much. We can only continuously educate our people. The idea is to get people from young. And the elders will have to show the example. If we show an example, and we are conscious, because it is the sunnah. And if a Muslim is motivated by the fact that what he is going to do is going to get him thawab by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then his motivation is different. He doesn't do it because he wants to be seen as belonging to this green movement or green group or whatever, as good as that is. He does it because he's motivated that this is the sunnah of my Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. I'm doing it because I love the Nabi. I'm doing it because it is his teaching. I'm doing it because he has shown us a wholesome and a good way of life. And if a person realizes that by doing that, he is in fact doing an act of ibadah, coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what he does is motivated. And the more, I think, we hear that type of motivation, that it is through the sunnah and through emulating our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we are going to be rewarded in this world, that the world's problems that they face will be solved, then I think a growing number of people will take to this idea.
And I suppose also, I mean, if you look at the drought, and naturally
Yes.
the experts will give their explanations of El Nino and La Nina and agricultural drought, hydrological drought. But we know everything is in the control of Allah. And in order to draw the mercy of Allah, we need to show gratitude for the bounties of Allah.
Right.
And this is a great bounty. And if we start to lead a life closer to the Sunnah in terms of not only wudu and ghusl, but every other aspect, making sure those taps are not leaking, making sure we don't use an unnecessary amount of water in anything that we do, we're showing greater gratitude, and لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. That's our way from our faith perspective towards contributing towards the overcoming of the drought.
Exactly, Moulana. And added to that is the dimension of tawbah. That we turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we turn back with regret for what we've done, and we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He changes our condition. Moulana, in the worst drought situation that we face, most of us still have access to water.
Yes.
We can open up our taps and we have access to water. People, we know in the Muslim world what type of problems they have. We are concerned about the fact that we don't have water. They are concerned about the fact that perhaps there is a bomb that is going to come, a barrel bomb that is going to come through their building the next moment.
Yeah.
So relatively, we must also put our type of problem into perspective and be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what He has given us. And a means of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like you right to say, is to act correctly. To act correctly with what the resources we have, to act responsibly with that, and inshallah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring about a change in conditions.
I want to say something, and
Yes.
I hope it's not misunderstood, because obviously Salatul Istisqa is something which is enshrined in the Sunnah, and that it was an effective remedy in our deen towards overcoming the drought. But one gets the impression sometimes we don't want to make the individual change. We don't want to do what we need to do to be able to preserve water, to be able to conserve water, to be able to deal responsibly with water. So every time we see there's a scarcity, all these WhatsApp messages start circulating. When is the Jamiat going to call for a Salatul Istisqa? Why are the Imams not making dua for rain in the khutbah? If the Imam misses out that dua 1 week, he's going to get a tongue lashing. And that's fine. I mean, we must make dua after our Farz Salah and in the Jummah, and the Salatul Istisqa has its place, although it has its fiqhi guidelines, when to and when not to. But we don't want to, we're always hoping, I don't know if I'm understanding it correctly, and that's why I'm putting it to you so you can also comment, that we're looking at those actions as a quick fix, because it's easy to go out one Sunday afternoon and read Salatul Istisqa, give 1 hour of your time, and much more difficult to start making wudu with the mud, and making and taking a shower with the bucket, and doing all the other things which we need to do.
No, and I think if we look at it from an Islamic perspective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a sunnatullah, that if you do certain things, there are repercussions in the world. This is how if you despoil the environment, you're going to pay for that, and you pay dearly for that. So I think we don't expect that sunnatullah to change. It applies to water, it applies to our environment, it applies to everything. I mean, and at the core of this, Moulana, is something that we always forget, that the crass consumerism has, to a large extent, resulted in the despoiling of our environment. And at the heart of consumerism is the idea that you can take out more from the environment than there is, which is riba. The very institution of riba is telling you that you can take out more than there is. And so, as long as you have riba and you have institutions that support riba, you're going to get an environmental disaster. And this is what we don't want to do, you see. We don't want to mend our ways, mend our economic system, mend our socio-economic system, mend our political system. And like you say, we have to make the change to effect the change. If we're hoping that the world be a better place, then we must be those people who bring about that change.
Be the change we want to see. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but it's been a fascinating and enlightening discussion. Jazakumullah for your time and for driving through from Lodium. And we hope to have you on the program again in the future.
It's a pleasure. Jazakumullah.
Assalamu alaikum
wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And to the viewers, Jazakumullah for your time. I hope that we can take lesson, and that each one of us, before the program concludes, we make the intention in our hearts that from now, I am going to lead the way in my own life and in terms of my family, in terms of preserving water. Remember that every drop counts and each one of us has a responsibility in this regard. We're going to lie in our own grave and we are responsible for our actions. What others do or don't do, that's their responsibility, although there is a kind of collective consequence to that. But apart from the country and the situation and our patriotic responsibility, we have a dini and we have a religious responsibility. You can catch the repeat on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. Until next week, inshallah. Fi amanillah, we request your du'as. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار في زمن أضحى به الحق بالخذلان مدفونا فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته وهل لغير القوي الناس يصغونا رباه هيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فأنت من بالتقى والدين يهدينا أدعوك يا أمتي فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار